So one of the things that I've had occasion to do over the last few weeks is just look back at previous addresses, previous things we've published online. And one of the things that I notice is that we talk a lot about the Lord. And when we say the Lord, what do we mean? When we talk about inviting the Lord into our lives, what do we mean? And what does that look like? How does it express itself? I have to say what I'm going to give you today is a very personal answer to that question. And perhaps you have your own answer, which I'll encourage you to reflect on in the week ahead. But the first thing that strikes me is that we have this saying that the Lord is love. And so Swedenborg says this about love, and he's speaking, we must remember, about the Lord. The essence of love is not to love self, but to love others, and through love to be conjoined with them. But we also have in the teachings of the Church another idea, which is that the Lord is order. So it says here in Secrets of Heaven, the Lord is order itself. And therefore, wherever he is present, order exists. And wherever order exists, he is present. But then what do we mean by order? You see, the order that is the Lord must be wrapped up in this idea of love, which the Lord is. And so I found this mention of the order that ought to exist in our own lives. Our proper code of life, or order, is to love one another as we love ourselves. But what we actually do these days is to love ourselves more than others and thus hate everyone else. Remember, where order is, there is the Lord. Where we live according to the order of life, or as it's put here, the code of life, to love one another, there the Lord is present. And to me, this is just reflected in this story that we heard on the way to EMMAUS. These two disciples who are left wondering what's going on, and they meet the Lord without really seeing him or understanding who he is. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him. And he vanished from their sight. And then a few verses later on it says, he was known to them in the breaking of bread. And Swedenborg says the breaking of bread was a sign that meant mutual love. So what does it look like to live from the Lord? I think the answer is pretty simple. As I say, this is mine. You may have others. But for me, one of the most important principles is the principle of community, of love for one another. You know, when I am committed to you and you are committed to me, is an expression of the Lord in our lives. But there has to be something beyond that. It has to be bigger than just you and me. It can't be just a closed set of relationships. It has to be a principle higher and greater than the sum of us. It has to transcend this group of people in this room. And our greater purpose that we gather for, whatever it is, that is our God. The question is that God the divine? And it all depends on how well we reflect the divine purpose in our lives. You know, I go back to that story and we listened to the disciples on the road and what they said. And they said to the Lord, but we were hoping that it was He who was going to redeem Israel. That's where they had their sights set. That was their purpose, that the Lord would redeem Israel. It's set in a particular place, in a particular time. They've got a particular goal in mind. But the Lord is known to them in the breaking of bread. And I think what happens is that they come to see something greater than that very narrow vision of life, of that very narrow focused purpose that they had, and the Lord opens it up for them. Now look, this is reflected elsewhere in the Word. So, for example, John chapter 13, we have that commandment of the Lord. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this will all know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. In the book of Hebrews, we have this, but do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. And if I find an equivalent of the story we've read in Matthew's Gospel, I find it in the parable of the sheep and the goats. And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it for one of the least of these my brethren, you did it for me. You know, to recognize the Lord in the life of another. This is what I hold on to here. An experience I've had, and I think it's been something that I've seen more frequently recently than I remember in the past, is occasionally coming across people who say, you should not associate with them. You should not tolerate their point of view. You should be, keeping away from them. And more my reaction has been to realise this, that the only reason I tolerate you is the same reason I tolerate them. And that is this command of the Lord. Now there are people in this world that I leave well alone, but I can count them all on the fingers of one hand, I can tell you. And the reason I leave them alone or avoid them is their capacity, as far as I can see, to destroy relationships. Their wish to pull apart or criticise the people that I love and that I know well. Those are the people that I avoid. But in most other arenas, I seek to tolerate and hear what others have to say. And for me, that's an expression of the Lord's love and the expression of the Lord's commands to each one of us. And I just want to finish with something that I read last week, which was this. It is a person who, in rejecting good, condemns himself. As a person has fled habitually from good during his lifetime, so in the next life he flees from it, and therefore from heaven and the Lord. Now, I take this as a great warning to us. Where we flee from this connection with others, do we also flee from a connection with the Lord? So as I said, I'm going to ask you in the week ahead, think about what is the thing the Lord commands of you? What is it to follow the Lord? What does that look like? How do you express it best? But also just realise this very important role of love, of relationship with one another. And just reflect, do you go seeking to establish relationship, to build bridges with people? Or do you go about seeking to build walls?